Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Football Podcast, right here in the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your host back again, Brice Lewis, to talk about all things football with you. And today we actually have a news field and results field show today. This is my first episode when this is released on Tuesday without Ethan. As you know, Ethan has moved on to other things, so it'll be me solo-doling it here on the podcast. But we're still going to keep it going. We're still going to have fun. So, first segment, we're actually going to talk about college football. We're going to talk about the college football playoff. They revealed their Final Four. My thoughts on the situation between Texas A&M and Notre Dame, and other college thoughts throughout this past weekend as well. I'm also going to get into the recap of the entire NFL Week 15, as a lot of big things happened. We're going to have a lot of stories, a lot of different things to talk about here, and that's pretty much how the show's going to do. You know what we do here on the Tuesday. We recap what happened the previous week of the season because, a lot of stuff always comes out, especially with, college football getting into their bowl season now, and then the NFL 2 weeks away from their playoffs. So it's a very exciting time as a football fan as you get some of the biggest games of the year coming up for the next couple of months, really for the next month and a half. So it's going to be very exciting to see what happens. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. So the college football playoff revealed their top 4 teams this past week. And the top 4 teams are, at number 1, Alabama. To be expected, they've been the best team in the country, dominating everybody, scoring over 50 points on everybody, it feels like. They got a tough fight from Florida. Alabama's defense is susceptible. If there's one weakness on this Alabama's team, if you have a good offense, you can score on Alabama. But the issue is that Alabama's offense is so good, and they have guys who feel like all of them could be Heisman candidates, and Devontae Smith and Matt Jones and Najee Harris. It's just that three-headed monster is just so dominant, and that's why they're undefeated, and they're deservedly so the number 1 team in the country. Then at number 2, Clemson. Clemson has been making news because of comments Dabo Swinney made about Ohio State, thinking that with them only playing 6-7 games, that they shouldn't even be a top 4 team. He thinks they shouldn't even be in the playoff, basically. In the coaches poll, he voted them, I believe. I forgot where, but I believe he voted him. He voted them in the teens. So he clearly believes Ohio State's not that good. But it sounds like he's also penalizing them on the amount of games they've played. So he feels like Ohio State's not a top 4 team, but his team is second. They got their win back against Notre Dame, destroyed Notre Dame in the ACC championship game. So everybody's thinking this looks like already an Alabama-Clemson final. And the third team is Ohio State. Like I said, some people have said the 6 games should matter. They didn't play enough games. How can you say if their 6 games are better than another team's 10 games? Because, people would make that argument with Cincinnati or Texas A&M and other teams. But the committee basically came out and said that we didn't even think about that. We felt like from the eye test, Ohio State was still one of the best 4 teams in the country. They still have Justin Fields. Now Ohio State doesn't look as dominant as they have been in years. They look like they're definitely more susceptible to losing. They had a tough matchup against Northwestern. But they were able to come out with a victory in the Big Ten championship. And listen, as much as we want to say it, I think this was the right move because it's one of those things where if you as a committee, if they release preseason polls, if they release their preseason top teams, I'm sure Ohio State would be up there in the top 4. And so playing 6 games, not losing 1, I don't see the committee sitting here saying, they're winning, but we're going to drop them. And so that's why, to me, in that situation, I understand why they went ahead and put Ohio State at 3 in the top 4 because I don't see them. It's one thing of Ohio State was viewed as not a good team this year, and then they won 6 games. Because then it wouldn't have mattered. If they were viewed as the 25th best team in the country, they probably wouldn't have gotten in. But since they were already viewed as a top 5 team to begin with, you can't just drop them because they haven't looked like the most dominating team in the country. The fact is they're undefeated. They won. They're Ohio State. Justin Fields. The committee looks at that and says, I mean, listen, they won the matchups they were given. We can't sit here and penalize them for that. They're going to get in. And then at number 4, this is where a lot of discussion happened. Notre Dame. It was really between Notre Dame and Texas A&M. Both teams have one loss. I believe Texas A&M played one less game than Notre Dame, I think. I'm not 100% sure. They might have played the same amount of games. But people were wondering, why did Texas A&M not get in? Now, the committee said it's because when it came down to it, Notre Dame had one more top 25 win than Texas A&M. But I said, if I was in this position and I had the deciding vote, I would sit here and say, if we played Notre Dame in Texas A&M Mutual Field, and they actually got odds on this game. They actually said the odds for a Texas A&M Notre Dame game is even. So a lot of people actually don't know who the better team is. And it's going to be a tough call, but I honestly sit here and think to myself, I would go with Texas A&M. I think it will be a close game, but I think Texas A&M would come out. I think they're built similarly as a team. And I think, it's kind of interesting. And I think really the big thing that helped Notre Dame at the end of the day is the fact they beat Clemson earlier in the year. Because they beat the team that beat them later. So, like I said, in a way, as a committee, you have to basically say, well, we can't penalize them for how they lost to Notre Dame. I mean, how they lost to Clemson because they beat Clemson. Yes, that was without Trevor Lawrence, but if we scratch that out, they're basically undefeated. And so, where Texas A&M, they did lose to the number 1 team in the country, which is not a bad loss, so they definitely deserve to be up in that position. But because Notre Dame got that win, they were able to get in. So, for me, I think it really it's pretty easily self-explanatory to me. With that perspective, they gave it to Notre Dame. And then also you have to ask yourself the question of your committee: do we really want to see another Alabama Texas A&M rematch? Do you think the result would be different? See, at least with Alabama and Notre Dame, we can sit here and think we know what the result is because Notre Dame, you think, is nowhere close to being able to compete with Alabama. But we don't know. We really don't know. College football is a game where we can be shocked at any time. And so we can't make any assumptions like that. We have to literally let the game play and then see how it turns out. And so it's one of those things that we have to just keep an eye on. But they gave Texas A&M the 5 slot. And then I want to talk about Cincinnati too, because a lot of people were talking about basically the committee, without saying it, is saying that the group of 5 teams don't have a chance. The only way a group of 5 team has a chance to get in is they literally have to schedule their non-conference a bunch of ranked Power 5 teams and beat them all. And even some people think maybe that won't even be enough. Because the committee does look at the eye test, and they may sit here and say, we just don't ever feel like any group of 5 team, no matter how great their season is, can stack up to a top Power 5 school. And so that's one reason why they're hesitant to even give them the chance to play. Now, yes, obviously they'll get their big BCS bowl game. Usually in those games, you usually see the smaller group of 5 team win those games a lot of years because of the fact they're usually very motivated by the fact they were snubbed, in their opinion. And then you have maybe a Power 5 team that doesn't really want to be there. We're playing who? We're playing Western Michigan. We're playing who? We're playing Coastal Carolina. Like those teams, a group of 5 team doesn't sit here and say, a Power 5 team doesn't say, oh man, we got to get up for that game. Unless it's a team that feels like they were snubbed from the college football playoff or something. So, this year, it will be Cincinnati playing Georgia. I think that's going to be a very interesting matchup. Clearly, if Cincinnati wins that game, they're going to feel like, well, if we can beat Georgia, we can compete with the best teams. If Georgia wins, it's just just a good way to end the season for them. But basically, that's your college football playoff, and people are still going to have discussions about should they extend the playoff, should they make it 8 teams, should they to give a Group of 5 team a better chance of getting in. I was watching the Group of 5 show, and Joey Galloway, he's a ESPN analyst for college. He was talking about how he feels like the committee should just go out and straight to say that the Group of 5 team doesn't have a chance. Don't sit here and say that they have a chance, but realistically they barely have a chance. And I think that's the biggest thing. Right? Like moving forward. And to me, maybe they should, but that's why there's going to be discussions about the top 8. And, we could get to a lot of other things about the college game, about how all the recruits are going to the same 4 schools, because literally you can say the college football playoff actually made college football worse because now college football recruits want to play in the playoff. Well, who are the teams that get to the playoff? Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, usually yearly. And then every year that 4th team's a revolving team, but usually it's either been Oklahoma, Notre Dame, or Washington. And remember, the first year it was Florida State and Oregon. But basically, those are the teams, and basically they're sitting there and like, well, I want to play in the playoffs, so I got to go here. And so, college football, there's always going to be discussion. There's always going to be arguments that can be made. But this is who the committee said were the 4 best teams, and so this is what we have to go with at the end of the day. These are the teams that they think are the best ones moving forward. We hope Alabama Notre Dame's a good game. It'll be interesting to see how that Ohio State Clemson game goes, because we can make an argument both teams haven't looked as dominant as they did last year. Because remember, last year's game was a great game. Both teams looked dominant coming to that game. 2 powerhouses. This game, Clemson, injuries, COVID, Ohio State, they've had 20-plus players last couple of weeks not playing because of COVID, because the Big Ten had a 21-day no play if you got COVID type of thing. And now they actually, when they saw they were in the playoff, they actually reduced it to 17 days to give Ohio State a chance to get more of their players back. So that's going to be very interesting to see. The fact that the Big Ten is saying, okay, we're going to try to help you guys get your players back. I'm sure Ryan Day's like, all right, guys, we really need to buckle down. No more COVID tests because, we've been lucky to get through these games with like 56 players, 70, 60 players, but we're going against Clemson. We need everybody we can get that's on scholarship, that's unredshirted, ready for this game. And so, that's going to be something that is going to be interesting to see. Just remember, the playoffs are only 2 weeks away. A lot of people don't realize the playoffs are right around the corner. The actual, first day game is a week and a half. Because I think January 1st is the first day of the game, so that's about, a week and a half away from the first game being played. So that's, obviously a very exciting time for all college football fans to watch the college football playoff. But it'll be interesting what happens. We'll have to kind of see how things go. That's really all I can really say on it right now. I gave my thoughts on what happened. I personally, again, would have put Texas A&M in, but I understand Notre Dame basically beat Clemson earlier in the year. They basically lost the Clemson championship game. They're basically undefeated. If you take that away, it's hard to go against that resume and say, yeah, Notre Dame doesn't get in. But off the eye test, I probably go with Notre Dame. With Texas A&M. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into the NFL recap. We're going to start on the AFC side of things. Stay tuned right here on the GSMC Football Podcast.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we discussed the college football playoff and my thoughts on Notre Dame getting in over Texas A&M, and my entire thoughts on the four teams in general, and just the status of the college football playoff. I've seen a lot of people on social media talk about how can we make it better, how can we improve it, what can change, things of that sort. I think that's something that people are going to discuss every year, because some people feel like maybe this is a year we have 5-6 teams deserving. These are all questions that people want answers to, and so we'll see what happens moving forward. These are the 4 teams the committee picked. They gave the reasons for them, and we just got to go with it. So, obviously I expect great games. Hopefully, the only game I think people are worried about is the Notre Dame game, because they just got blown up by Clemson. And so you're thinking, oh man, Alabama, the way they've been world beaters this year, that may not look good on paper. And so we'll have to see. But, hey, you never know. Notre Dame might shock the world, make the game more competitive than people think. And then you sit there and it's like, whoa. Hey, I actually might sit here and beat Alabama. That sounds like shocking, but, Brian Kelly talked about it. So he feels like they're a better equipped team this time around than back in 2013 when they met in the national championship. But now it's time to get back into the NFL news, NFL update. We're going to start on the AFC side of things. I want to get into the Patriots and Miami first. The Patriots, after losing to Miami 22-12, this was the first time, or was it 22-12, was it? I think it was 22-12. But for the first time since the Matt Castle year, the Patriots will miss the playoffs, losing to Miami. They are now 6-8 on the year. They cannot even finish with a winning record either, which I think is the first time, literally since 2000. I think it was before Brady, but it's kind of crazy. A lot of things have gone wrong in New England. Obviously, people have made this, Tom Brady's not there. But we have to think about the major issues with the New England Patriots. They don't have any weapons. Defensively, they were still good. One thing about Bill Belichick's teams is they're always well coached. So that's why I feel like coming into this year, people thought New England might be one of the worst teams in football. Especially with all the players that caught out on defense. But still defensively, they were able to still be a good defensive team this year. It's just offensively, they couldn't do anything. Cam Newton has not looked as good as we thought he would look this year. Passing-wise, he's had some clunkers in terms of yardage, 69, 70 yards in a game. And you're thinking, dang, Cam. Now, running the ball-wise, of course, that's the strength of Cam. He can run the football. He's 11 rushing touchdowns on the year. The running backs they have. But they couldn't establish anything offensively, and it just came back to them. And then on Miami's side, Miami had probably one of their best rushing games of the year. They would run it. Tua had 2 rushing touchdowns. Tua, one thing about Tua, I think, some people have been critical of Tua because he hasn't put up huge numbers. He hasn't had that 350-yard, 4-touchdown game. Tua has had a lot of 200-yard, 180-yard, 160-yard, 220-yard games, maybe a touchdown or 2, and that's it. And so when you look at those stats, you think those are game manager stats. But I also look at the team and I think to myself, well, first, they're not asking him to throw for 350 because of the fact they do have one of the better defenses in the NFL. Remember, the Dolphins coming into the New England game only allowed 18.8 points a game. So defensively, they were one of the top teams, which I think is second in the league. And then, they have had, I believe, 30 consecutive games with a turnover since, they've had over. Is it 30? It might be. I have to check. But they have that long consecutive streak of turnovers. And they also have a Defensive Player of the Year candidate in Xavier Howard, or they call him X in Miami. He had another turnover in this game. I mean, they're defensively, they look really good. They're one of the best defensive teams in the league, and so that's going to keep them in a lot of games. And so really offensively, they just have to do enough to win. And you also got to think about this game. Coming into this game, Miami did not have 3 of their top pass catchers. They didn't have Devontae Parker, they didn't have Mike Gesicki, and they didn't have Jakeem Grant. So he did it with a lot of guys, 3rd, 4th, 5th string guys, and, that's why they relied so heavily on the running game. And luckily, like I said, Miami's Achilles heel offensively is they have not been able to run the ball effectively all year. And it's crazy in the game against the New England Patriots, a team that has always been disciplined when it comes to the run game. On the run defensive side of the ball, just got gashed by Matt Breida and Ahmed. And I think that just shows, again, Miami showing they can win in multiple ways. I think that's one thing about a really good team is that they can win in multiple ways. Because sometimes you're going to have that ugly game. Sometimes you're going to have to score 40 points because that great Miami defense is not going to be able to always stop every single team that's like 17 points. That's not always going to be the case sometimes. So, you got to be able to win in multiple ways, and Miami did that this week, and they were able to come out with a good victory against New England as they continue to try to basically win out to make the playoffs. Because if they lose a game, the reason why I think a lot of odds makers are saying Miami's not going to make it is because that Bills game. I think a lot of people are going to go with Miami beating the Raiders, but the Bills game. But the question now with the Bills is going to be, you're playing in the wild card round, and you've already wrapped up the division. It's week 17 when you play Miami. Do you play your starters and try to win the game? I guess if you want to say keep Miami out of the playoffs. Or do you say, we play next week. Let's rest some of our guys. We don't need any major injuries before this playoff game. Because I'm a guy who feels like if you have a bye week, you should rest your starters. Or I would say this. Rest your most important players. So that's usually your quarterback, maybe a running back, and maybe a wide receiver. But play everybody else. Because if you lose your quarterback, that could be a big blow. If you lose your running back, that could be a big blow. If you lose your receiver, that could be a big blow. I mean, a lot of other players, you could lose them and that be a big blow as well, but it's not going to maybe completely kill your chances. But we don't know what Buffalo's going to do going into that game. Because I predict Miami's going to beat Las Vegas, because I feel like Las Vegas is just falling apart. So it's really, that's the game that I think a lot of people are projecting Miami to lose, which is why, and with Baltimore having an easier strength of schedule to end the year, people are projecting that they're going to win. Because literally, Miami can clinch a playoff spot this week. If Baltimore loses and they win, they would get the spot because they already have a one-game lead conference-wise on Baltimore. So if they win, they'll have a one game in the win column plus now a 2-game conference advantage. Well, actually, no, because the Ravens are playing the Giants. So basically, they would have a 1-win advantage. And so it doesn't even matter if Miami lost next week, unless there's another tiebreaker that would get Baltimore in. But that's why pretty much Miami has to win out. So we'll be interested to see what happens with Brian Flores and those guys. And let's see if they can pull it off. We'll have to see how all that ends up going. But then I also want to get into Cleveland. The Cleveland Browns won their Sunday night game against the Giants. Baker Mayfield continues to look impressive. Baker has really played well the last 3 games. And he's looking more like the Baker we saw at the end of his rookie year than we saw basically all of last year and the first part of this year. He's played very well. He's played very efficient. And like they said, him maybe not having Odell Beckham might have been for the best because he's able to spread the ball out to all his receivers. And you're seeing the playmakers that he has, plus the running game, against a good Giants defense. Giants are going to be competitive because of that, but they didn't have Daniel Jones this week. Colt McCoy had to start. They couldn't really get anything going offensively, and we saw how that went against the Cleveland team that, got the 10 wins. This is the first time they've won 10 wins since 2007 when they went 10-6 with Derek Anderson at quarterback. So they got 10 wins. They've pretty much all but solidified themselves as a team that's going to be in the playoffs this year. It'll be interesting to see what Cleveland does when they get there. A lot of people maybe think Baker may not be ready for that yet because he'll get his first playoff experience, but we'll have to see. They have everything else, it seems like, on the offensive end set up for him. And, listen. I think Cleveland's a team that we've criticized, Baker a lot. People question if he could consistently play this way. People question if he's even that good of a quarterback. Is he a bust? And I've always been hesitant to say Baker's a bust. And I knew coming into this year, this was a big game for a big year for Baker, because if he struggled, I'm sure with a new regime that came in there, they would sit here and say, okay, we got to start looking at another guy. And the way he's playing now may make them say, okay, we can go ahead and keep him. Because remember, after next year, his contract is going to be up if they pick up his fifth-year option. If they don't pick up his fifth-year option. And so they're going to have to decide, okay, do we give Baker an extension? Do we say, yeah, he's going to be the guy? Or do we potentially take that chance and let him explore his options somewhere else and we bring in someone else? So, these are all questions that, are going to be asked. People are going to wonder about. People are going to see about. And we'll have to see, how it turns out with Baker. I've kind of been a fan of Baker Mayfield. I've always felt like that he's a guy who's always had a chip on his shoulder. Remember, back in college, he was a walk-on at Texas Tech and became the starting quarterback, and then get transferred to Oklahoma and became the starting quarterback, led them to the playoff. So he's always been a guy who's defied the odds. He's always been a guy because he's not the biggest quarterback in the world, and so a lot of people have always doubted him, doubted if he could be that good, and now again, Baker, after last year, was doubted. A lot of people felt like he was a bust. A lot of people felt like he wasn't going to be good enough. And seeing his change, his revolvance, him bouncing back to put himself in this position where now he could be, everybody would say the running game was the reason, but now Baker is now becoming more of the reason why Cleveland is making the playoffs. That's going to be big for his confidence moving forward. Is going to be big for the front office confidence in Baker Mayfield going forward. And also his teammates around him. You don't know. Like, listen, we're all human. You're seeing Baker play bad, turn the ball over, get sacked. As a team, you're probably like, dang, this guy may not be it. Some guys may have that thought in the locker room. But, with him playing the way he is, now people may be like, you know what? Yeah, Baker's not that bad. And I think that's the biggest thing moving forward. Now, do I feel like this is the end of Odell Beckham in Cleveland for sure now? Yes, I do. I think Cleveland will be looking to move him. That's why now it doesn't look that good that they gave him the extension they gave him before the year, because now they're realizing we're actually better without him, and so we may need to move off of him. But then also this isn't good on Odell Beckham's resume, as we have to see is a team willing to do it. Now, again, a team that you probably could very much see make that move is New England. I would not be surprised if they make that trade for Odell Beckham this offseason. So that's just a quick point to point on. Odell used to want to play in New England because of Tom Brady. Does he still want to go to New England play? We'll have to see. But we know New England needs a number one receiver. So that's a destination right off my top of my head that I feel like could be a place for him to go. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into some more NFL news, because we had a lot more news in the NFC side of things this week. So stay tuned for that.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we discussed some AFC headlines that I felt like, was kind of important. Obviously, both related to the playoff picture, and also just talking about, Cleveland basically firmly submitting himself as a playoff team this year. It'll be interesting how far they go. Miami still battling, as they're looked at by a lot of analytics as the actual unfavorite to make the playoffs, even though they're currently in the 7th spot because of that matchup with the Bills. So it'll be interesting to see how those two situations go. We're actually going to bounce to the NFC now, because there's a couple big things that I want to talk about. And first thing I want to talk about is what happened between Arizona and Philadelphia. That was probably one of the better games we've seen all year. And before I get into Jalen Hurts, because, I have a lot of praise to heap on Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray finally looks like Kyler Murray from earlier this year. Remember when he suffered that AC joint, that injury? He didn't look like the same guy. I think it was against Seattle. It was on Thursday Night Football. He suffered that AC joint injury. He didn't look like the same guy. The Cardinals were scared to run it with him. He really never ran it because they didn't want him to get hurt. He wasn't healthy. I believe it was on his throwing shoulder, so he wasn't able to get that type of zip on the ball that he usually can. And you saw that him in that offense was not as effective, which was one of the reasons why they lost 3 in a row, which got them to 4 in a row, which got them to the point where they were almost on the edge of missing the playoffs. But with the last 2 wins, they've looked much better. Kyler Murray looks like Kyler Murray. He's also part of my fantasy team, so that's extremely important that he did go back to being that, because playoffs, I'm going to the championship route. Defend my championship, just saying. But Kyler Murray looked really good this week. He looked fast. We know Kyler Murray can make people miss. He always gets down, so you can never really get a lot of clean shots on him. And, he looked effective through the air as well. And then when we talk about Jalen Hurts, we know, basically, Jalen Hurts is auditioning to be the starting quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles. That's what he's doing. He is auditioning to be the starting quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles. And right now, he looks great. Coming off that upset victory over the Saints last week. Then also coming back this week in a loss, having 4 total touchdowns. Jalen Hurts, 3 touchdowns, no picks. Over 300 yards through the air. Jalen Hurts looked like he belonged in the league. And then there was a report that came out before the game that said basically Carson Wentz didn't like the way the Eagles handled the situation. And if they're going to stick with Jalen Hurts, he wants to be traded. And so Philadelphia is going to have a very interesting decision to make this offseason. Because if Jalen Hurts keeps playing like this, I don't see how they can justify playing Wentz. Because how can you sit here and say, Jalen Hurts, you balled out last year, but only because of the money we're paying Carson Wentz, we're going to start him? To me, I don't see how you can do that. Because you don't know how Jalen's going to take that. Jalen may sit here and say, I balled out. Like, I showed I could start in this league. It probably wouldn't happen because remember he's a rookie. You wouldn't hear a guy in his second year talk about I want to be traded. But could Jalen Hurts potentially be unhappy with that? These are all questions that people are going to look for answers to. And so the Eagles have to be real careful with the situation. Jalen Hurts was a guy in this year's draft that a lot of people looked at and said, he played better at Oklahoma as a passer. He improved as a passer, as a thrower of the football. Because he was improving behind Tua at Alabama. Then transferred to Oklahoma. Improved in Lincoln Riley's system. And that's why he was able to move all the way up to a second round pick. Because before, even after his second year, people were saying Hurts may be not even drafted. He may not even be a top three round selection. Because he had not shown anything to make him seem like he could be a quarterback. If anything, people would say, well, he's really good at running, maybe a running back, maybe a tight end. But we know Jalen Hurts wanted to be a quarterback. And so basically, Jalen Hurts worked on his game and became a second-round pick, surprisingly. Not because he was drafted in the second round, but more because it was by the Eagles. Because think about it, they had just come off the year, injuries, Wentz led him to the playoffs, he played well. You were thinking they just gave him the extension. You're like, there's no way that Hurts is going to hit the field, right? Because it's like, because only thing people said was because Wentz has gotten hurt, Jalen Hurts may see time because of that. And it wasn't even injuries that got him to see time. It was just the fact that Wentz fell apart. Fundamentals, mechanics, his play, all went down the drain. And that's what got Hurts in the position that he's in now. Where now he could basically show this team, this front office, and say, I should be the quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles. Because of the way I've been playing, how can you justify not playing me? And that's real. That's real. Because how can you justify not playing him? And then this actually may be a blessing in disguise. Because remember, they had just tied up a lot in the Carson Wentz financially. I don't know if they're still going to have that same cap hit if they traded him, but I know if they cut him at $66 million against the cap. Jalen Hurts is still on his rookie deal. So you may be able to afford this hit. Because here's the problem. If they had cut Carson Wentz, let's say they didn't have Jalen Hurts, they would still need a quarterback. If they don't have a quarterback already, they may have to sign one. So then you have to pay even a 1-year starter, you may have to pay like $10 million, $12 million to. So you still have to tie up that much into that guy. Where Jalen Hurts was a second-round pick, he may be getting paid $1 million for his salary, 1.3 for his salary. And so now you have no cap hit with him. So if you were able to somehow trade him, and let's say if they were able to trade him, it was able to take $20 million off that cap hit. So now it's only $46 million, which is still a big hit, but you were able to get $20 million back, and Jalen Hurts is not costing you anything. The Eagles have some injury issues. They have some talent issues. So they can afford to sit here and say, okay, we have money, we have time before we have to pay Jalen Hurts. Let's try to get a better roster assembled around him. And then obviously we'll see what happens with cap flexibility when that time comes when they have to pay Jalen. If he continues on this trajectory up. And, we'll see. Because remember, the NFC East has been interesting because it feels like the two teams that have been the face of this division, the Cowboys and the Eagles, have been going down this year. And the two teams that have kind of been in the lower cellular of the division have been the Giants and the football team, and they're going up. But this may be able to keep the Eagles from going down too long and being able to rise back up if they're able to keep and go with him as the starting quarterback if he continues to play this way. Because he's only played 2 games. So we can't assume this is Jalen Hurts, but this is what you want to see, and I feel like you'll be willing to take an investment to see if this could be the guy moving forward. And then, obviously we have to get into my Falcons blowing another lead to Tom Brady this week. Listen, like I've said before the show, I'm just ready for the offseason to be here. It's funny because I think a lot of people are. It's like we hate the way we lose games because we hate the way we lose games. Though I do feel like this narrative of us blowing leads can be taken out of proportion because, like, this game we blew a lead, but like, what if you're in a back and forth kind of game, and then you just happen to have the lead late because you just scored a touchdown, and then the other team comes back and scores a touchdown? I don't think this needs to be a narrative that we blew a lead. It was a back and forth game. Blowing the lead is we had the lead throughout and we blew it. Not, it's back and forth and then we lost it at the end. I think I think it's one of those things where I'm worried that this narrative is going to stick where, if we score a touchdown, right, and we're up by 2, and the other team comes back and kick a field goal, I don't want to hear a headline, we blew a lead. It was a 2-point game and we just took the lead. Y'all make it seem like if we ever lose a game again, if we were ever up at any time in that game, we blew a lead. That's just my only gripe with it. But overall, listen, we know they're cleaning house. Matt Ryan bounced back from his game. And honestly, the biggest thing about the Falcons is they're just very inconsistent. They'll play really good in the first half, and then second half, they just act like they don't know how to play football no more. The offense isn't as effective. Defensively, they're not as effective. It's weird with this team. They just go through these periods of times where they can't do anything. And it's just like, why? And then that's why we lose, because it's like we can't do anything. We're not consistent 60 minutes. And we need to change that. And that's what I hope the new regime for us changes. I hope that, and honestly, this may be why people feel like we may move off of, Matt Ryan and them, because just with everything that's happened, some people may feel like you may need to get rid of some of the guys that have been there, a part of it, to truly get that taste out of their mouths, because sometimes that can be in their heads. And so, I can understand again why if they decide to move off Matt Ryan, I'd understand it. Personally, if it depends. If we're trying to go the young quarterback route potentially, because listen, with the Jets winning yesterday, which I'll get into the next segment, some people think they may not draft a quarterback now. It was either Trevor Lawrence or they're sticking with Sam Darnold. And so then you go to 3 on the list. And I don't think the third worst team in the NFL right now needs a quarterback. Because let me look this up real quick. Because I need to look at the standings. So the worst team in the NFL, Jets, Jaguars, right? Jags are probably getting Trevor. The Bengals are the third team. They got Burrow. And then I believe Houston is 6th. The Panthers are not going to draft. We are under the assumption the Panthers will not draft a quarterback. That Teddy Bridgewater is the guy. That's what I'm saying. As far as we know, they're not going with Justin Fields. That is literally what we think is going to happen. And then the Falcons are 5. Justin Fields is on the board. What do we do? Do we take Justin Fields? That's going to be the big question. Georgia fans are going to look at this as a right to the wrong for starting Jake Fromm over Justin Fields and then him transferring. For him to come back to the city of Atlanta and now be the quarterback of a new regime in Atlanta. It sets itself up, so we'll have to see. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to continue on with more NFL news. Stay tuned.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about on the NFC side. I gave my little spiel on the Jalen Hurts situation, how Carson Wentz has requested a trade if he ends up remaining the backup in Philadelphia, as he didn't like the way the Eagles handled the situation. And the way Jalen Hurts is playing right now, Carson Wentz could be out the door, potentially. Just saying. We also talked about the Atlanta Falcons, how they blew another lead, how with the Jets winning, which I'm about to get into, has now created a situation where now the Jets may not draft Justin Fields. The Panthers might not draft Justin Fields. The Bengals aren't drafting Justin Fields. And with a new regime coming in there, and Arthur Blank already giving control to the GM and owner, the head coach saying, if you want to move off Matt Ryan, you can. Could we see Justin Fields in Atlanta next year? Obviously, if they don't win any more games, which they're playing Kansas City next week, we're expecting that to be an L, and then we'll have to see what happens in Week 17 against Tampa Bay. So there's a very good chance, unless Panthers win another game or so forth, Atlanta might be in great position to potentially get a quarterback next year. But now we're going to get back into some news. We got to get into the Jets, man. The Jets beat and upset the Rams. The Rams are just such a weird team. Before I actually get into the Jets, the Rams are just such a weird team, because they can beat the best team in football with the way they're constructed, but they also can lose to the worst team in football the way they're constructed. It's the weirdest thing. They're so up and down. They're so inconsistent. You don't know what Rams team you're gonna get. They could come into and the craziest thing is that's why I think it's hard to put your trust into the Rams and think the Rams are going to be this great team that makes it to the Super Bowl, because we know they can have that week where they don't play well, and you can't really do that in the playoffs. Because when the Rams play at their best, they really are potentially the best team in all of the NFC. But losing to the Jets, man, that's an all-time low. And I don't think it's going to derail their season, but it's just like, I'm sure Rams players are coming out of the game like, how did we lose? Why did we lose? Like, we should be head and shoulders better than this team. Now, we have to be honest. The Jets have played better in recent weeks. It always happens when you know you're on that edge of being winless, and you're just like, it feels like every player plays even better than they played before, because they're trying so hard not to be part of that type of history. And the Jets were able to avoid that. Now, they probably will still go 1-15, but they were able to avoid it. And so the Rams are probably like, dang. And I know Sean McVay's probably like, dang. Coming off such an impressive win over New England, and then having that basically clunker against the Jets. And then on the Jets side of things, they won, but they may have also lost. Because now they're second in the draft. And so people are wondering, dang, they lost out on Trevor Lawrence. But the one thing we got to look at here is it really a terrible thing? Now, I understand, Trevor Lawrence, he's supposed to be a generational talent. But if you're a Jets fan, like, sit and think about this for a second. Are you really in a position where, with this loss, you feel like this team has no future? Because if you say that, to me, you've basically admitted you've given up on Sam Darnold. It's not like a situation where we don't have a guy and we need this pick to get a guy. It's we have a guy, but we potentially have a generational better guy coming in, and we're willing to move off the current guy to get a better guy. Plus, on top of the fact that I've already said before, if they traded Sam Darnold, they probably could get some picks back and help improve the team around Trevor Lawrence if they drafted him. So that may be off the table. Because I don't think, and I think a lot of people are looking at the comparisons and thinking, I don't see Sam Darnold not being the starting quarterback next year if they didn't draft Trevor Lawrence. Because people don't see them doing that for Justin Fields. And so for me, the Jets are in a situation where, listen, we still have 2 games left. The Jags could win a game, and then now Jets are back at number 1. But it just puts them in a very, I think, interesting spot. Because we don't know how it's going to turn out. The Jags have to play Chicago and Indianapolis. And you know, the Jags, if they got Trevor Lawrence, that would be a huge, like, I feel like the Jaguars need Trevor Lawrence more than the Jets. Because the Jags, I mean, Gardner Minshew was fine, but we know he's not the guy. I think Gardner Minshew is a very capable quarterback in this league. He's a guy to be who can start. He's going to be a top backup who can start if you needed him to start. That's what Gardner Minshew is going to be to me in this league, which is not a bad career, which means he will have opportunities to start. Having a Tyrod Taylor type of career is not bad. He's been in the playoffs before. He's won games. And I think that's what Gardner Minshew can be. But he's not a guy you can make your franchise quarterback. And so getting a Trevor Lawrence would definitely help that franchise. And I have more confidence, even though Jacksonville has always had organizationally never a great history. I feel more confident in them getting a team built around Trevor Lawrence than I did the Jets. Just because I've already seen what they did with Sam. And so I wouldn't look at this as a terrible thing. I think that, sometimes things happen. You have to bounce back from it. But I think the Jets, this isn't an end-all, be-all, but I understand why that fans are very disappointed today, even after winning. It's kind of crazy. Sports is a weird place where fans would actually accept being 0-16 just to get a player. It's interesting. Where you would think every fan always wants their teams to win. And then as soon as we know, well, we're not going to win, so let's just lose every game. It's actually kind of funny. It really kind of is. And then, I got to get into the Saints-Chiefs matchup. Big-time matchup, 32-29 win for the Chiefs. A lot of people asking questions about what's wrong with the Chiefs. They're winning a lot of games and one-possession games. And I'm just sitting here and I'm just like, we must really think the Chiefs are the greatest team ever assembled. Because this is the NFL. You play a lot of close games. I understand that we think the Chiefs are this dominant offensive team with Patrick Mahomes and all these weapons. But, I mean, y'all act like they're supposed to sit out here and blow everybody out 40-0. And they're still 13-1. I mean, they're 13-1 on the season. But because they're not blowing people out, now all of a sudden there's questions if they're as good as we think they are. I'm just like, They're winning. What's the issue? They're winning games. I don't see what all the hubba and concern is about. So, I mean, listen, if people want to sit here and be concerned with that, so be it. But I think they're fine. And I think, listen, even through all the close one-possession games they've had, they're still projected to win the championship this year. They're still the favorites. So it's not like their performances maybe made people think they're not as good as we think. Literally, I feel like the Saints game is his own game because the Saints are a top team in the NFC. So them having a close game against them, that shouldn't be a shocker. But I think they're talking about the games against Las Vegas, and they're talking about games against Miami. I mean, it's just like, listen, it's the NFL. Things happen. This kind of stuff happens. You can't sit here and just say, because Kansas City's not blowing everybody out, that maybe they're not as good as we think. Should we be concerned? And if they lose, it's like, well, the one possession. I'm just like, huh? If they hadn't lost that game to Las Vegas, they would probably be on their way to being an undefeated team right now. And they lost that game 42 to like 30 something. So it wasn't like they didn't even score points. Now, yes, I do think Kansas City's defense is susceptible. And you can you can have some big plays on that defense. So it's not like that's an inaccuracy or anything of that sort. But I don't think we need to be sitting here thinking that Kansas City is just completely, just not what we expected. To me, they're exactly what I expected. They still look good. Patrick Mahomes still looks like a great quarterback. I mean, he's still in the MVP discussion. And we're having these questions. I just don't get it. I literally just do not get that at all. So, we'll have to, I guess, keep an eye on that moving forward. And we'll have to see. And then I want to get into some NFC East talk before we get out of here. The Cowboys now have a chance to win the NFC East. They're only a game behind Washington. Easiest schedule. They've won their last 2 games. Washington's lost their last 2 games. Cowboys can still make the playoffs. So I guess Cowboy fans are ecstatic right now. And I'm just like, okay, you're going to get blown out. Because I feel like the way Washington is constructed, they could give a team a better game than Dallas. You know what I'm saying? Because, like I said, they had a high shootout with San Francisco this past week. Now, that's good for their offense, and their offense came alive. It sucks for Amari Cooper fantasy owners because he only had 2 points in a shootout. But Washington, they played Seattle, so it's not like they played a team that was not good this week. Washington plays Carolina next week. That's going to be a big game because it's Ron Rivera going against his old team. They hope Alex Smith will be back for that game. If he is, and they win, then they play Philadelphia in the year. Both very winnable games. And all Washington really has to do is win one game. All Washington has to do is win one game, and they clinch the division. In terms of the Cowboys can't win the division. See, the Giants, if the Giants win out and Washington loses, then the Giants win the division because they have the tiebreaker. They swept Washington. See, in Dallas' situation, if Washington won the division, they only need to win one more game because they'll have the tiebreaker on the Cowboys. So we'll have to see what happens with the NFC East at the end of the day. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Football Podcast. Thank you for letting me be part of your day. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_football. Also, don't forget to leave us a review or subscribe on any platform that you're listening to us on. This is your host, Brice, saying have a good day, signing out.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.